We now move, out of internal session and on to session 2, motion number 3, managing Scotland's energy potentials, to be proposed by Steve Chisholm and seconded by Mike Mackenzie. And just a reminder to proposers and seconders of motions, please do submit cards so I know that you are in the room. So to be proposed by Steve Chisholm, please, followed by Mike Mackenzie.
Chair conference, good morning, or maybe it isn't, maybe it's afternoon now. A motion on Scotland's energy future. Friends, let's say it plainly, Scotland has an energy of a nation twice our size. But if we don't act now, others will simply suck the wealth right out of it. Across the world, as countries everywhere are scrambling for energy security, we in Scotland, we already hold a winning hand. From the wild Atlantic across our windy North Sea, our waters contain some of Europe's best renewable resources. We're already exporting surplus electricity. But the scale of what's coming next, it will dwarf everything we've done so far. That is both the opportunity and the danger, because we've lost out before, and more than once. With onshore wind, we built some towers for a while in Scotland, then all that stopped, and everything now gets imported from overseas. And with fixed bottom wind offshore, the manufacturing work and the value, with the tiniest of exceptions, goes abroad as well. But now, coming down the horizon is floating wind, a new industry, still young enough for Scotland to seize a massive opportunity in terms of scale of jobs and value. It's our third chance. And it's our last chance. Floating wind is bigger, it's bolder, it's more complex. It needs deep water ports, vast laydown areas, and the kind of heavy manufacturing that once made Scotland's workers so proud around the world. But here's the truth. Developers can't buy Scottish if there isn't a Scottish supply chain. And today, Scotland only has one new factory under construction. So we can't blame developers for buying abroad where the factories already exist. But we must build our factories here, because if the first of these floating wind foundations, now being considered right now and debated right now round about us, if they're manufactured and assembled overseas, which is the real risk here, we'll lose a whole new industry before it begins. Our ports are ready, expanding quaysides, reinforcing berths, preparing for these giants of the sea. But ports alone, they're not enough. We need public investment, not just promises. And government must lead, co-investing in fabrication halls, welding lines, coating shops, to give developers a real buy Scottish option. Because if the only rule is buy wherever it's cheapest, Scotland will lose every time. There will always be somewhere cheaper, but nowhere than Scotland, with more to gain and more to share than here. Conference, this is about taking control. We've been rich in energy but poor in benefit for too long. We get this right, we rebuild our industrial strength as a nation. We get it wrong, and others will profit over and over again from our own resources. But there's a caution. As we build, we must build wisely, with respect for our communities, our crofters, our fishermen, with care for the landscapes and the seascapes that define who we are. Independent impact assessments must be carried out in future before licences are granted. Developers must be held to account so the Scottish bids are judged fairly, with total costs, including the lost tax revenue from overseas workers and the costs of bringing in these costly units from overseas, the cost of transport, the cost of all the carbon emissions they put out. They need to be compared honestly. And there should be imports only where no viable Scottish option exists. And we need a bold public sector investment drive to make Scotland not only green in its energy, but golden in its opportunity, because that's what independence means. Not just owning our own energy, but owning the means to build it, the means to share in its rewards, while at the same time we protect the people and places that make Scotland unique. So let this be the moment that Scotland turns its energy wealth into an industrial renaissance, a great description penned by our ex-leader, sadly departed, and an energy wealth built on respect and resilience and pride for our people. So let's make every turbine that turns, every watt we export, carry the mark of a nation that stood up, invested in itself and built its own future, while we safeguard the beauty of the communities and land we call home. And finally, of course, we can't talk about energy and supply chains without acknowledging the wider net zero debate, something as a party we must also address. Current government policy is undermining Scotland's oil industry, threatening tens of thousands of skilled jobs, and deepening our reliance on costly import. And this is something we must also pick up on. This is so important to Scotland's future economy. Thank you, Conference. Please approve this motion.
I call Mike Mackenzie to second the motion. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you,
And Mike will be followed by Charlie, who will speak in favour of the motion. Those looking for cards are just in the front of the stage, just there. Mike, welcome. Good to see you.
Thank you very much. Good to see you too. And if you wouldn't mind indulging me just very briefly to pay a tribute and to give thanks to our leadership, to our office bearers, and to our small team of staff. You're doing a fantastic job, so thank you very much. And I'm very pleased to have the opportunity of seconding this motion and following Steve in his excellent speech. And I'm happy to support it, not least because it gives me an opportunity to apologise to the people of the Highlands and Islands. Because I was an early enthusiast and supporter of renewable energy. And I preached to all and sundry about the economic opportunities renewable energy presented for the Highlands and Islands. And 15 and 10 years on, we've seen very few of the benefits that I'd hoped would by now have materialised. I remember Alex Salmon speaking at a cabinet meeting in Fort William in 2011, explaining how the socio-economics of the Highlands and Islands would be transformed by renewable energy. I remember him talking about Scotland having won the energy lottery not once but twice, firstly with oil and gas and then with renewables. And I remember him saying that Scotland could become the Saudi Arabia of renewable energy. In Conference, I'm firmly of the belief that had Alec continued in his office of First Minister, we would have realised a lot of these benefits by now. And as an economist, he understood the enormous potential of our energy resources. And as a politician, he understood rural Scotland and regional inequality. And he was determined that all of Scotland had to benefit from our resources. That's why he took his cabinet on tour to all the corners of Scotland. And he understood that in order to capture these benefits, we needed an industrial strategy. We needed a supply chain. We needed planning and environmental policies to support these fledgling industries. And sadly, what we've seen over these last few years has been the squandering of our energy opportunities. Alec used to say that Scotland was the only country in the world that struck oil and got poorer. And as the saying goes, fool as one, shame on you. But now, in failing to realise the potential of our renewable energy, the shame lies at our own doorstep, at least some of it, and at least some of it at the Scottish Government's doorstep. Delegates, it's been estimated that we've got enough renewable energy to generate at least 10 times of Scotland's total energy needs. That means we can easily develop these energy resources so that no part of the Highlands and Islands, or indeed Scotland, has to face overdevelopment. That means if we're wise enough to capture the supply chain opportunities, we can build a high-value industrial sector, creating high-quality jobs. Instead, we've seen years and years of gross mismanagement of Scotland's priceless energy resources, oil and gas and now renewables, and yet our people pay the highest energy costs in the developed world. And we suffer disproportionately from the highest rates of fuel poverty in the UK. Scotland's economic future rests in the proper stewardship of our energy resources. That's why we urgently need independence. Please support the motion.
Thank you, Mike. I now call Charlie able to speak in favour of the motion, to be followed by Mike Knowles, who will speak in favour of the motion. Those are the last five to have. Charlie.
Thank you. You ken there's an energy crisis. It's freezing in the front row. And I'm from Aberdeen. I ken about the car. Anywho, we have this debate a lot in the Laku. It's a hot topic about energy and what the sleight of hand of carbon accounting does as well, because it's ludicrous that oil's left in the North Sea and we want to import it from abroad. That's not green, that's not helping the environment, that is just plain nonsense. We need the jobs for ourselves. But the energy policies that we need for the North East oil and gas industry and the momentum we have to build to drive our future energy market and the new technologies are all inextricably linked. We cannot talk about these issues in isolation. We can't talk about energy policy without talking about net zero. There are many conflicting views on these matters, and that's exactly why we need a clear, informed approach. So I would support this motion, but I would also propose, conference, that we establish a policy working group on energy strategy, talking about net zero as well, to research our policy, consider all perspectives and develop the best strategy to harness the full power of Scotland's economies for a sustainable and prosperous future.
Thank you very much indeed, Charlie.
Thank you.
To speak in favour of the motion. Thank you, Mike.
Some exercise to warm me up. I support this resolution, this motion. Much of the actual text talks about supply chain, which is obviously very valid, but it's topped and tailed by 2 points which I consider we need to really note, because this, if adopted, this will become a policy. It may not be discussed for another year or two. The final sentence says, conference demands that beyond 2030, every watt of energy exported should be metered. I'm sure it is already metered. The people running the transmission systems know what's in their systems. What we actually need is some radical thinking. We should actually be levying tax on energy exported. Now, I know it's reserved at present, but there are grey areas. You know, I see no reason why the Scottish Government now, under its environmental powers, shouldn't levy a tax on electricity generation, which is refunded to users in Scotland. It's a workaround, but there may be areas there. So let's be more radical and ensure that our energy exports come with some benefit to the people of Scotland. The first part also talks about impact assessment on local communities, farmland and fished seas. Well, already we have a process. The Energy Consent Unit of the Scottish Government assesses each wind farm. And I've become familiar with this because of a proposal in East Lothian where a business based in Bristol proposed to build some massive turbines higher than the Queen's Ferry Crossing on the edge of the Lammermuir Hills, visible from East Lothian, much of Edinburgh and Fife. And we have a system where any business can make a proposal, do some assessments, however shoddy, employ some publicity people and put forward a proposal for a wind farm. The sole motivation is profit for them and the landowners. It's sold as green energy, climate emergency, when most of these land-based wind farms are really producing a drop in the ocean in terms of what is already available and what may be available. Much of the focus has been on the Highlands with industrialisation. It's also happening in the borders and alluvions. So what I would say is support this resolution, but let us ensure that we actually have a consistent policy where wind energy, renewable energy, is generated as part of a strategy rather than bit by bit based on whichever business wants to produce a wind farm for its own profitability, and let us ensure that the people of Scotland, the businesses of Scotland, benefit from the energy we produce and sell abroad. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks very much indeed. I have no question again. Can I ask the motion be passed by acclaim? We're running ever so slightly late. We have a guest speakers. I have two requests of delegates, please. First one, and I request the speakers also, may we move the next motion to after lunch. That's the motion Small Business Bonus Scheme with the forbearance of Alan Duffy and Steve Chisholm. If you don't mind, is that okay with you, speakers? Thank you very much indeed. Is conference agreeable to that? Move that after lunch, thank you. And then instead, because we have a guest speaker, I'd like to introduce our Director of Communications, most excellent Director of Communications, Jim Eady, to give a report and also to introduce our guest speaker, Jim. Please welcome Jim Eady. He works in an entirely voluntarily but brilliant capacity. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you very much, Tasmina, Chair. Conference, we've heard some difficult things this morning about our party, but because of the sterling efforts of our staff, Corey Wilson, Robert Reid, Callum Ansell, and the fantastic leadership provided by Kerry McCaskill, Neil Hanvey and Tasmina Ahmed Sheikh, we are in good spirits as we go into the coming election. And we should be mindful, as Tasmina reminded us this morning, of the fact that in the latest poll by Find Out Now, Alba is at 6%. But that 6% is across the whole of Scotland. We're actually in touching distance of winning seats in every region in Scotland. And that's the prospect that we have if we can only surmount the difficulties that we heard about this morning. I think there is a bright future for Alba, and we are on the brink of that electoral breakthrough. Now, key to that success is the fact that we are the political party in Scotland with the correct strategy on independence. The SNP is pursuing a strategy which has more to do with keeping John Swinney in Bute House and about keeping ministerial posteriors on the benches at Holyrood and in the back of ministerial cars than it is with achieving independence. Now, that strategy was bequeathed to us by our founder and former leader, Alec Salmond. Alec knew that in order to achieve independence, you had to have a strategy and a plan for achieving it and delivering it. And that plan was about uniting the YES movement, uniting all of the pro-independence parties, and getting them to agree to put into their manifesto a pledge that if 50% plus one of votes were cast for pro-independence parties on the list, then that would constitute the mandate for independence. And further polling by Alba has shown that the Scottish public agree with that strategy. 6 out of 10 said it would be legitimate for the independence movement to pursue independence through a Holyrood election. And yet the SNP have turned their backs and walked away from that strategy. Now, I want to tell you today about a secret weapon that we have and that we intend to deploy to great effect in the days and weeks ahead. And that secret weapon is independent councillors for Alba. We have 7 independent councillors who are coming out today to back Alba on the list and to say that they will support Alba on the list in order to achieve the pro-independence majority in the Scottish Parliament. We have among their numbers Bob Spears, who is Scotland's longest serving councillor in Falkirk and who has worked alongside Kenny in the campaign to secure the future of Scotland's oil refinery. So the Magnificent Seven are being led by Bob Spears and another councillor who is with us today and who is going to tell us more about why this significant group of people, the Magnificent Seven, as I say, have come out for Alba. And the person we have today is Andy Doig. Now, Andy Doig has been a councillor in Renfrewshire. We have councillors in Falkirk, in the Western Isles and in Renfrewshire who are coming out for Alba. And Andy is a principled man. He believes in Scottish independence, heart and soul, as all of us do, and he is putting his support for us in the public domain as we approach the election. So really, conference, I just want you to give a very warm and rousing reception to Andy as he explains to you why he is now supporting Alba on the list.
Conference convener, fellow delegates, I'm delighted to be here today, and Jimmy D is correct. The Alba party should be in good heart. I'll tell you why. I've been sitting here for the last 10-15 minutes, and it's been amazing to be in a political forum to listen where you can have respectful democratic debate between the membership on one hand and the leadership on the other. And they both work together in tandem, the way that modern democratic political parties should be. And it's a breath of fresh air to see this happen. It really is. Now, there's certain parties that have got a great way of saying things these days. They keep saying, the world has changed. The world has changed. Well, the world has changed. I mean, you know, we all know the famous saying by the late Harold Macmillan in the 50s, the winds of change are sweeping across Africa. But they're sweeping across the British Isles as well. This week alone, look at what's happening. There's been a complete gale has blown through Wales yesterday when Plaid Cymru won a historic by-election on 28% of the vote. That's a govern-type by-election win for Plaid Cymru in Wales, driving right into Labour's heartlands. And Wales is setting up now to be a two-way contest next year between Plaid on the one hand and Reform UK on the other. You're also seeing today something that we may not be as aware of, but it will have an equally devastating effect, and that's the likely victory of Catherine Connolly in the Irish presidential elections, who's a pro-unity voice. If you take that into account, what's happening in the Republic of Ireland, what's happening in Wales, we need to also look at what's happening in Scotland. And you know, some people think that the rise of the odious quasi-fascist Reform UK is the rise of the UK. This is the UK's comeback tour. It's actually not. It's actually the swan song for UK PLC, in my opinion, convener. Because at the end of the day, you can see what's going to happen next year. We need to have strong pro-independence policies and strong pro-independence parties in Holyrood. It's essential. The way I see the Alba party developing is to forge some strong pro-independence arguments. Jimmy D was correct, convener. You need the strategy, but you also need the policies to work together, just like the membership and the leadership have to work together. And that's crucial. And for me, when I look at Alba's policies, you've got the correct policy in the reindustrialisation of Scotland. You've got the correct policy on realistic policy in oil and gas. You've got the correct policy on EFTA, which would allow Scotland independently to trade with both England and Europe. And these are really important changes. These are the kind of policies that people want. So I'm backing Alba on the list next year because you need to have some strong democratic Alba MSPs in there in Holyrood to be the cutting edge of independence. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Andy, for joining us here. Most welcome to stay for the meeting if you so wish. But now it is time for lunch. It's 1 o'clock and we will reconvene at 2:15 p.m. Thank you, delegates. Good afternoon, conference. Before we start the next session proper, I'd like to invite Ken MacDonald to speak to us. Ken's the editor of iScot magazine, who have supported Alba from the very, very beginning all he wants is independence, and I'd like to give him a chance to say a few words to you. Please welcome Ken. Ken.
Thank you very much indeed. A way back in 2013, I fell out with my wife after shouting at a man called Jim Murphy on television. Several times. Effectively, the reason why we had a spit flick TV was I just couldn't put up with the arrogance of the man's attitude towards the self-denigration of Scotland. It was just not on. But more to that, my wife of now 40 years said to me, why don't you just shut the hell up? Because I'm scared of you whining about politics. We've got families, we've got elderly parents to look after. You know, there's more to life than politics, but to me it wasn't. And I said, I really feel passionately about Scotland, and this guy's really killing it. And she said, well, why don't you do something about it? And that was the reason iScot was born. Now, we're a publication that's been made by just sheer stint of ambition to prove to Scotland that we can have a publication that gives an alternative view to the British media's version of how events should be or can be. And sadly, the demographic for people who buy publications in the United Kingdom as a whole, and Scotland in particular, is 55 years and over. Anybody less than that, generally speaking, gets their media from their handheld phones or their laptop. So we try to find a way that we get access of this information to people that can't afford 35 quid a month for a modem, or pay for an expensive iPad, that still use the printed material as their preferred medium. And so we tried our very, very best and found that we were getting resistance from a variety of organisations who would deliberately not advertise because they were afraid that their customers would vacate them in large number. So it's a case of just hanging on in there, constantly spreading the word, and after 14 years, we're still here. To the tune of, as I said to Taz earlier on, we just heard that the SNP have been sponsoring their magazine to the tune of £350,000 over several years. We don't have that benefit. Everything is done by pension money that I have, by just getting out here to events like this to try and sell the magazine and try and capture the spirit of those that believe in independence and appreciate quality publications. We're sitting out there in the hall, and we had £2.60 in the till for quite a while. We've had several since then, but please, if you get the chance to come, we'll give you a magazine free to try it and read it. If you like it, please subscribe. But the only way we're going to have any kind of publication that's seen through a Scottish lens, owned by a Scottish company, for Scots, by Scots, then you need to support it, because it's not going to grow without you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Oh, by the way, sorry. We also have Scottish passports, which coincidentally are called Alba passports, that we've designed ourselves. They're on a very reduced price. See us at the table outside. Thank you.
Ken.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, back to business, and before we hear the motion that we took, that we've moved over from before lunch, we have a topical that's been accepted by the Composites Committee, which I don't have the screen, so I can't show you immediately. It's going to be a simple motion, as Morgan will explain to us, of congratulations on Plaid Cymru's victory. Morgan Davies to propose the topical motion. Thank you very much indeed.
I realise this was mentioned a couple of times in the course of other speeches, but I thought it would be good if we took the time to formally say that we think that Plaid Cymru's result in Caerphilly was wonderful, and to congratulate Lindsay Whittle on his stunning victory in what has been the Labour stronghold in Wales. They've held the Westminster constituency there for 100 years. They've never lost that seat since the Welsh Synod was set up in 25 years. And yesterday they got 13% of the vote. in the last general election for the Welsh Senate, Labour and the Tories got 63% of the vote. Yesterday they were reduced to 13% of the vote. So we should congratulate Lindsay Whittle and Plaid Cymru on a remarkable result, and we should say that we hope that it heralds the start of the end of Labour's dominance in Wales, and that Plaid Cymru will take power next May as we win seats in the Scottish Parliament. So we congratulate Plaid and Lindsay on their excellent result. He's already been sworn in and he's already started work. So just to say congratulations to them.
I have a seconder from the floor. And Neil, if anyone else would like to speak to the motion, is my mic on? Do you want to raise your hands because you haven't had time to put in the card? Yes, please. Quite aptly. Marjorie Thompson. You haven't had time to complete a card, so I'm giving all of you this voting time. Marjorie.
I hate using my middle name because it makes me sound like an upper class twit, but I do use it when I write to the Scotsman. My middle name is Ellis, so like every American, I've got a bunch of different bits of the British Isles in me. Not only do I want to say congratulations to Plaid Cymru, I'd like to say bendigedig, which means fantastic. And I'm really thrilled for them because I knew all along that their strategy, which they've been pushing for at least 30 years, was to try to get that breakthrough in the valleys. And I think a large part of that is because it was seen as a language pressure group before, but when David Ewan wrote the song Umar Head, We're Still Here, during the miners' strike, now we've got Welsh football fans singing it because it's a lot easier than the national anthem. Anyway, I feel a bit sad because my ex-partner died in February, and I haven't been in touch with him anyway for 30 years, but I know he would have loved to have seen this result, and it's just really fantastic, and I think it forbears a lot of exciting things for all of you ahead.
Thank you. If anyone else would like to speak, just let me know now. You're happy? Oh, yeah, hand there.
Too close to their mouths.
Hi, William. I'm presuming you're speaking in favour. Yes. Welcome.
Good afternoon, conference. So first of all, as everyone has been saying so far, congratulations to Plaid Cymru on a fantastic result. And to the member who won the constituency to begin with, absolutely great to have broken a Labour fortress that has lasted a century. You can't overstate that. This has been a sign, I hope, of things to come further. We are seeing across the United Kingdom what has been termed by people throughout history writing books dying empire syndrome. And one of the first signs of dying empire syndrome is the rise in local patriotism and nationalism. Whether it was the Ottomans, the Romans, whether it was the British Empire, we are seeing the once safe heartlands dying. And Wales is probably seen as one of the safest parts of this so-called United Kingdom, which, let's be honest, when was the last time it felt particularly united? It can't agree with itself on anything. Wales, once seen as one of the safest parts probably of this country, is starting to find its voice. It's starting to find its voice through the party of Plaid Cymru, and they have never given up, despite at one point being seen as nothing but a bunch of people wanting to be, as said, a language pressure group. And they are proving that they are not giving up. They are fighting in the Labour heartlands. They are crawling through the trenches, so to speak, and they are starting to see results. That cannot be overstated. And I give heartfelt congratulations to Plaid Cymru, and I'm sure everyone in this room does. Heartfelt congratulations to the people of Wales for finally showing what they really think about the Westminster establishment and Labour in particular. Thank you.
Well said. Any other hands? We all happy? Can I ask that the motion of congratulations to Plaid Cymru and the winner of the seat Passed by acclaim. Thank you, Conference. We return to motion number 4, Small Business Bonus Scheme, to be proposed by Alan Duffy and seconded by Steve Chisholm. Alan, welcome.
First time speaking as well.
Are you?
Yeah, I know I've spoken before, but I am.
Oh, are you or are you not a first?
A lot of questions. First question.
Welcome, Alan.
Good afternoon, conference. I put forward this motion because each and every one of us have been out knocking doors over the years, and the businesses themselves have told us that they're struggling to get along, and a lot of them are falling apart. They're having to give their businesses up and disappear, basically. So I wanted to put this forward. I've based this mainly on Inverness. Now that's only because that's where I am, and that's the information that I know. But I also know that what happens in Inverness is mirrored all over Scotland as well, in each council area. Now, as we saw, there's the Highland Council they give a lot of money into the Scottish Government, which is how the thing stands. It goes to the council, the councils pass it on to the government from there, and then the council gets to keep a little bit back again. I want to change that because the system at present hasn't been changed in it's nearly a decade now, and it does need to change. So, given the fact that we have large businesses that could fight the case for business rates, but they're not willing to do that themselves. So the only way for them to do that is to see about getting things changed in the Scottish Parliament so we can change the criteria and up the tariffs so that businesses have that little bit extra that they can keep in their business and be able to keep themselves afloat and maybe even take on new staff. Because not having staff is having a lot of burden on them. That's really the reason why I decided to write this motion, because I see businesses struggle, and that's the last thing we need in Scotland is businesses to struggle. We need entrepreneurialism. We need to allow them to keep going and flourish. That's the reason, and that's I ask you to approve this.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thanks, Alan. I now call Steve Chisholm to second the motion.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Conference. I'm really pleased to come up and support Alan's motion for this, because across Scotland, right across from our islands to our inner cities and glens to high streets, small businesses, they're the heartbeat of our economy. They're the butchers, bakers, hairdressers, barbers, all working long hours, little cafes that know every customer's name, and builders, joiners, plumbers that keep our communities working. They're family firms, sole traders and start-ups, but they risk their savings, their time, and often their very sanity because they believe in Scotland, they believe in themselves. And yet, sadly, the framework that's meant to support them just hasn't kept pace with reality. Costs have surged, energy bills have soared, and too many of these businesses are just barely one bad month from closing their doors for good. And when these businesses falter, our communities take a real hit. Shutters come down, lights go out. Another young person loses their chance of a first job. Bit by bit, the life drains from our high streets, and I think we just can all walk around any high street these days and see the evidence of that. And the motion before us, it's a fix, but it's a temporary but vital fix. It needs to happen. Modernising the small business bonus scheme so more of our smaller employers get breathing space, with real special recognition for smaller towns and rural areas for trading's toughest. It's not charity to these businesses, it's common sense. Because when we back local enterprise, the returns are immediate and they're visible. A bit of rates relief becomes a new hire. A surviving business becomes a thriving one. And the money, it stays local. It pays the employees, it pays suppliers, It keeps trades busy, building resilience from the ground up. And we know this works because other nations our size are doing the same thing. Ireland, Denmark, Finland, New Zealand, they've all built strong economies that are modern by putting small business at their very centre. They know national prosperity begins on local high streets and in small workshops, not just in boardrooms or financial districts. And that's the mindset we need here in Scotland. And with independence, we can reclaim the tools of fairness, creating a system that really works, keeps more of the value created here in Scotland. Because an independent Scotland, it won't be built by multinationals alone, but it'll be built by people like the joiner in Wick, pub owner in Coatbridge, the web designer in Stornoway, childcare provider in Falkirk. All of them ordinary working Scots, but doing extraordinary things every single day. They're the organic engine of our economy, the innovators, the employers. They're the risk takers who give Scotland its character and its strength. So, conference, let's pass this motion. Let's declare that in the Scotland we are building, the strength of our very nation will rise from the courage of our small businesses and from the people who dare to dream, dare to build, and will succeed. Please pass this motion.
Thank you to you both. I have no cards in against, no further cards to speak. May I ask therefore that the motion is passed by acclaim? We now move to motion number 5, which is securing the future of Scotland's fishing industry, to be proposed by Charlie Abel and seconded by Angus Brendan Neal. Angus Brendan Neal is on his way here. He's missed one mode of transport in getting to us on time. So he won't be speaking to this motion, but he will be speaking later on. By that time, he will have arrived here on the one on ferries. But I'll adjust the timing of that shortly with your agreement in due course. But for now, to propose securing the future of Scotland's fishing industry, I welcome Charlie Abel.
Hi. Well, you'll have read the motion already, and I'm pretty sure that by reading it, most of you would probably agree with it. And just to add more insult to injury to the Scottish fishing industry, the news that's been out this week seems a great time to add this to my existing motion, because this is ammunition, if ever you needed it, that we need independence to support the Scottish fishing industry. So, in this week, the Scottish fishing industry has widely condemned the UK government's grossly unfair allocation of funding from its £360 million Fishing and Coastal Growth Fund. This was a fund that was created in an attempt to placate the fishermen after ministers gave away 12 years of fishing rights to our waters to EU vessels earlier this year. This access will allow them to take fish worth about £6 billion from UK waters. Remember, fishing is a devolved item. The Scottish Government were not consulted on this original 12-year deal, neither were they on the allocation of the funds. Remember, fishing is devolved. Without prior notification to the industry north of the border, DEFRA announced on Monday this week that Scotland would receive £28 million in total over the period. Wales and Northern Ireland would share £28 million between them, meaning that £304 million would be allocated to England. Let that sink in. England lands less than 23% of the fish, but it will take 84% of the funding for itself. Scotland's share of UK landings is much bigger. The Scottish fleet does all the heavy lifting. In 2023, the Scottish vessels landed 70% of the UK's catch by tonnage and 63% by value. That's the majority of the UK's industry output. The UK's top fishing ports are Scottish. Peterhead is the UK's largest port for landings, and Lerwick and Shetland is the second. Shetland's weight in Scotland alone handles 19% of all fish landed in Scotland, underlying how central the Isles are to national supply. Scotland, namely Peterhead and Shetland on their own, each land more fish than the combined landings of England, Northern Ireland and Wales. But the new UK fund barely recognises this reality. Of the £360 million Fishing and Coastal Growth Fund, Scotland receives just £28 million. That's about 7.8% of the share. while England gets 304 million. Industry leaders and local leaders have called this grossly unfair, and ocean-going madness was one quote, given Scotland's dominant share of landings. The bottom line is Scotland's industry lands most of the fish, hosts the top 2 UK ports, and yet is allocated less than 1/10 of the flagship fund. Conference, the facts speak for themselves. Scotland's fishermen land the lion's share of the UK's catch, about 70% by weight, 63% by value, and harbours at Peterhead and Shetland are the beating heart of the British seafood economy. And yet the UK's new 360 million fund gives Scotland just 8%. That's no union, it's no partnership, it's plainly unjust. Let's call it what it is robbery. Our crews work the roughest waters, sustain the coastal towns and keep plates across these islands full, and yet they're rewarded with scraps. This is why I say to our Scottish fishermen, we must control the levers that shape our future. If the decisions are made elsewhere, they will always chronically undervalue your contribution. Independence becomes not a dream, but a necessity. To invest fairly in our fleets, our harbours, our apprentices, the communities that depend on them. Let's back our Scottish fishing industry, back this motion and show them that only with independence will they have their best interests served within Scotland, and probably joining EFTA, but certainly not if we stay in the Union. Please back this motion.
I call Gavin Bain to second the motion, to be followed by Christina Henry, who will speak in favour of the motion, to be followed by Dot Jessamine, who will speak in favour of the motion. Gavin Bain to second.
I have to say, I wasn't fully familiar with the picture that Charlie just laid out for us. But even without that, I knew that the fishing industry was a bargaining chip used by Westminster in their discussions with the EU, and that disadvantaged Scotland hugely. I knew that the fishing industry has been underinvested in along the years. I lived in Peterhead at one stage in my life. It was a thriving harbour. It's still a busy harbour, but it was absolutely jam-packed, I remember, and the rate that the industry has declined has been quite alarming. And it's not just the boats, it's the communities around it, and all of the businesses that depend on the supply chain and the processing, the transport. It affects the whole community. But I couldn't lay out the impact in better than Charlie just did. So happy to second the motion. Please support it.
Thank you, Gavin. I now call Christina to support the motion.
Conference, I was really pleased to see this motion on our agenda. I think it's crucial for us as a party to speak up for Scotland's industries and highlight again why independence is needed. A little bit, a wee fact about me you might not know. I was born in Peterhead, and my dad always tells me, he held me up to the window and it was overlooking the harbour, and I opened my eyes and my first ever sight was Peterhead Harbour. And as Charlie said, Peterhead is the largest fishing port in the UK. And that's not something that we're often told. We don't often highlight that. And as Charlie's also said, Scotland has been allocated 20 million from the 360 million Fishing and Coastal Growth Fund. So this is a share of less than 8% allocated by the Barnett formula. But this is despite Scottish vessels typically landing more than half of the UK's catch. Tell me, how is that fair? How does that add up? Scottish vessels make up 40% of the UK fleet, but they account for more than 60% of the UK's fishing capacity and more than 60% of its seafood capacity. These figures are staggering. We're one of the richest sea areas in Europe, and we're a global pioneer in sustainable fishing. Now you tell me that means we're too wee, too poor and too stupid. I don't think so. Scotland has incredible potential as an independent country, and this motion again highlights why we need independence to support Scotland's industries, especially our fishing industry, which is crucial for Scotland. Thank you.
And I'd like to call Dr. Jessamine, who will speak in support of the motion.
Dr. Jessamine, I live in Fraserburgh. Others have dealt with the factual situation of this really quite disgraceful allocation. I've lived in Fraserburgh. I live in Fraserburgh now. I have campaigned there. I banked there. I live amongst this community. And I want to talk about them rather than the wider political thing. What actually happens when an industry as important as this is treated in this way? I think we have to think beyond that and to realise what it means for our communities. We are the party of independence. First and foremost, seeing it as the first thing that's required before we can deal with all the problems that we're raising during this conference. And the fishing industry to me is a supreme example of exactly why independence is needed. For the UK government, it is an industry which at the time of the last EU negotiations represented about 2 to 3% of the UK economy, against the somewhere between 70 and 80% represented by the financial sector of Southern England. Given that, it's obvious what a UK government is going to do. For a Scottish independence government, fishing becomes an important topic. It not only in terms of the actual money involved, but the fact that it employs and gives support to people from the rural jobs where there are very few others about. Peterhead, Fraserburgh, all little villages where these people work. There's not that many other big industries about to give people jobs. It will come as no surprise to the people of Fraserburgh that once again Westminster is selling them down the river because they're accustomed to seeing their interests traded to the European countries who support their fishing industries in favour of the City of London. And the communities have, in fact, for us in the independence movement, they've always recognised the importance of independence. From Angus to Aberdeenshire to Murray, the fishing industries have been the basis of our support. They were our earliest, Fraserburgh and Peterhead gave us our earliest councillors. They were voted in the nucleus of our representation of Westminster, and indeed was the support voted in our own Alex for many years. I think those people deserve our support. Support the motion.
Thank you so much, Dot. I have no cards against me. I ask that the motion be passed by acclaim. We now move to motion number 6, from fishing to farming and standing up for Scotland's farming and food producers, to be proposed by Charlie Abel and seconded by Charlie Flint. Charlie Abel.
Back again. Well, farming's important to Scotland, and just think about the folk that work on farms and in rural communities all through our country. There are people that are connected to the land, and I think a lot of the folk that are maybe in, what is it called, the Green Party, that claim to be connected to the land, the sort of wine bar socialists. And the farmers that are up and down the country are nae like that at all. They can an awful lot about if it is and if it isn't. Anywho, I'll summarise my motion. Scotland's agricultural sector is under severe strain. The UK government's recent decision to change agricultural inheritance tax rules has loaded more cost and uncertainty on farming families. While some publicity has focused on wealthy landowners, the reality is that ordinary farmers will struggle most, often facing six-figure bills they wouldn't be able to meet from farm incomes. Farm incomes and land values have diverged sharply. Land values have soared due to speculation, carbon offset schemes and purchases by the wealthy, or even foreign companies, while actual farming incomes remain modest, in some cases under 20 grand a year. That's below the average wage. Inheritance tax changes threaten the families now with the transfer of their family farms, creating stress, legal costs and potential forced sales to cover tax bills that they cannot pay. Who's going to step in and buy these farms? Will the farm still be a proper farm? Since Brexit, there's been more problems. The Scottish agriculture contributes 16 billion annually, that's 17% of the UK total, far above our population share. Yet since Brexit, Scottish farming has been left with declining real-term support. Under the EU's Common Agricultural Policy, farmers would receive ring-fenced, inflation-adjusted payments on a multi-year cycle. Post-Brexit, Scotland is forced to rely on annual settlements from Westminster, worth less each year in real terms with no long-term certainty. The recent UK budget accelerated the wind down of the basic payments, leaving the Scottish farmers facing cuts of up to 79% next year. This undermines food security and places Scottish produce at competitive disadvantage. Think about the importance of Scottish food produce. Scottish food and drink is internationally recognised for quality. Whisky, Scottish beef, lamb and seafood are among our strongest exports. They're part of our national brand and part of our identity. Protecting and promoting this produce is not only an economic imperative but a cultural one. What this motion does is call for the fair treatment of family farmers, protection of Scottish produce and recognition of agriculture as a strategic national priority. Specifically, it rejects damaging UK inheritance tax changes on farmland, calls for the restoration of fair inflation-linked agricultural funding, supports reducing the tax burden on family farms and securing intergenerational succession. It urges stronger legal protections and trade promotion for Scottish produce. It recognises that only independence gives Scotland the powers to secure its farming future and recognises joining EFTA as a sensible route forward for our trade policy after independence. I would ask you to support this motion. Scotland cannot afford for Westminster to undermine our farming sector. Family farms, rural communities, food security and the Scottish brand depend on bold action. This motion shows Alba's commitment to standing with farmers and ensuring Scotland's agriculture prospers for generations to come. Recently, a few of us from Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire went to the Turra Show and we were campaigning there. And we talked to many people. It was very engaging and nobody was really against this. They're an open place for our support. They just need a reason to support this. And we don't have a farming motion. We need one, and the support will follow. So I would urge you to support this motion. It's very like the fishing one.
Thank you very much, Charlie. And I call another Charlie Flint, to speak for the motion to be followed by Doc. Jessamine will speak in favour of the motion to be followed by Alan Duffy. Charlie, welcome.
Good afternoon, conference. As Charlie alluded to at the end here of his speech, this motion was actually inspired by during a car journey back from that Turriff show. We'd had a very successful day there, and following on from the example of Aberdeen Lacou's leafleting at the tall ships race in Aberdeen earlier in July, it was considered appropriate to create a leaflet for our visit to the Turriff Show. This was done in concert with Christina and Robert, and the leaflet involved a map of the show, which we had permission to use, and one of our ways of introducing it, and on the back of the leaflet was obviously much about Alba. On the back of it, our way of introducing it was to open the leaflet and give it to people and say, this is where you are, but have a look at the back, this is where you could be. That seemed to resonate quite well. It was important in Aberdeenshire. Aberdeenshire extends to some 2,400 square miles, and much of that is countryside, and the farming community and those that earn a living from supporting that community live there. So it's important that we eventually consider that the fact that there was no policy, something needed to be done. So that's why I'm here today. I didn't expect to be standing here, I have to say, some months ago, but it's been a pleasure to be able to rise and follow Charlie. And it was said earlier on, this is a motion that headquarters, I think, has been put together by a pair of Charlies. Well, that is true. That is true. But we need to be able to reach out to the farming community and those in the countryside to let them know that we understand what some of the problems are, and to listen to what their problems really are, and see what help we could offer them for the future. So it's about listening to their concerns, listening to their issues, and listening to their aspirations, so that we can perhaps help them along the road in the future. Among the issues that do affect the farming community is climate change. And this year, I knew very little about the farming community, much to my discredit, but research is very useful, and Mr. Google is very helpful. So among the issues that I've been able to uncover is that climate change does affect farmers. And this spring, apparently the malting barley crop was severely affected by the weather, and if the impact of that is that what would be good malting barley for the whisky industry ends up as feedstock with a much reduced value to the farmer. So they need to be able to have some support if necessary for the bad seasons. Brexit's had its impact, but there's recent legislation which is apparently quite well received in the farming community, the Agriculture and Rural Communities Scotland Act 24, which sets out a good system on the face of it for replacing the subsidies that came with membership of the EU with a new scheme. But the problem is that these new schemes are well conceived, but delivery and implementation may not come as expected. But that's the sort of thing that we need to be considering, that the farmers will always continue to need some sort of help because they're producing what we need. And the farming industry has got so much going for it, and there's an awful lot of expertise in that industry. So we don't need to tell them what they need. We need to listen to where they think we can help. Labour shortage is one of the big problems, and that has some impact on one of the motions earlier about migrant workers. We took the opportunity on the way down from Aberdeenshire to stop in at Castleton Farm, and it's amazing what that organisation's doing now. They've got some almost 1,500 polytunnels, which would stretch from Castleton, which is near Furdin in the Mearns, down to Glasgow. And they've gone over a short period of years, they've gone from 20 acres of strawberries to 120 acres of strawberries by use of polytunnels. And they've been able to extend their growing season up to 9 months producing strawberries, which seems quite amazing. And they're self-sufficient in energy. So there's lots of other farmers that could walk down that road as well, no doubt, with appropriate help. And the other thing that amazed me is that one of the signs in the cafe or restaurant was that they employed 600 seasonal workers, and they housed them on the farm. Now that may be slightly historical, but the display is still there. That's a lot of workers and a lot of employment. So that's the sort of thing that we need to appreciate, and we also need to consider educating youngsters to get them back into agriculture. In my early days, I have recollections of almost every house that wasn't a tenement had some form of ground available to them. If it was a shared back garden, a shared back green, where the people could grow their own produce. I'm not suggesting we go back to the good life. We've probably gone too far. Things have become a bit soft. But even those that lived in tenements had an opportunity to have an allotment. And that's the sort of thing that's very difficult to get nowadays, because okay, thanks very much. I'm being cut short here, but educating diversification of crop production is seen as very valuable, and promotion of urban farming. That's bringing farms closer to communities. That would be beneficial. There's so much more that I could say, but the main thing is, please support the motion.
In favour of the motion put forward by Alan Duffy, then Ian Cameron, and then Lewis Atkinson, all to speak in favour of the motion. Lewis is the final speaker. Dot.
Yes, I just want to raise really 2 points, which I hope, if we pass this motion, the party will take into account when it starts evolving its detailed policy. The first is concerned with what was colloquially at the time known as the power grab, the point at which Westminster decided to hold on to certain control powers passed back by the EU rather than passing them on to Scotland. And among those were various things which will seriously affect the agricultural industry. I mean, I think most of us understand perfectly well that they held on to them because they knew they were going to have to start negotiations with people like the US, and they wanted to offer a whole UK market. Among the things which we in Scotland don't approve of, and which were included, were things like hormone beef. We don't produce hormone beef, and basically it's a matter of cost. Farmers would have difficulty in competing with the sort of meat that will be coming on the market. There were other rural industries. There were things like it's not something like hormone beef isn't just a question of whether we want to eat it. You know, it's much cheaper to produce. And we know, I think, from the recent behaviour of Mr. Trump that trade negotiations are on the way at the moment. And basically anything we can do to reinforce the fact that we do not want to see Scotland farming traded away to the UK. I mean, there are other things as well. I mean, things like most of the farmers in my area produce barley. They produce barley for the whisky industry. The whisky industry could find itself competing with hooch, because the Americans believe that you can make whiskey safe to drink, not by keeping it for 3 years as we do, but by stuffing it with chemicals. An appalling idea, as I'm sure you'll all agree. So that was the one point. I hope that we'll take that into account and do everything we can to put pressure on the Scottish Government to do something about it. the other thing is that I think we should tie in our policy on this with our policy on EFTA. A few years ago, when the SNP was still behaving in a proactive fashion, Ian Hudson arranged for us to go on a seminar to Brussels. And among the lectures that we heard was one from the Norwegian ambassador. Now, I'm not going to go into the sort of the machinery of EFTA, but what she said, and it's very relevant to our industry, was that Norway had an arrangement whereby they didn't pay tariffs on what you might call raw materials. In other words, if you were selling meat or you were selling fish, you would not pay tariffs. If you put it in a tin, you would. And so I think, again, this is something where a policy that we already have is enhanced, could enhance anything we pass today to do with the support of agriculture. So, thank you.
And I call Alan Duffy to be followed by Ian Cameron and then Lewis Atkinson. Alan.
Thanks, Conference. Obviously, I'm not a farmer myself, but I've got a lot of friends that are farmers, and a lot of my friends that were ex-military, they came out, they got into farming. Some of them got into crofting and things as well. And the one things I actually showed this motion to my friend. He's a sheep farmer in Aberdeen, and he looked at it and he says, this motion is certainly a lot better than what we've currently got at the moment, and it's something that the Scottish Government should really be pushing a lot more on, because he himself, through his sheep farming, he makes more money exporting the fleece to the likes of China and places like that, because the rates in Scotland and within the UK are just too high for him. He's getting less money for his own farming produce in the UK than he is getting it elsewhere around the world. And that boils down to, again, same thing, but business rates for a lot of other things. But again, in Inverness, when I was a Highland councillor, I saw a lot of agricultural land be snapped up. Now, this is used up, agricultural land that was used for various different types of farming that was going on. And the London-based company that owned the land decided they were selling it off, and they were building a housing town in the area. And because of the planning laws around that, none of the councillors could turn around and say, we can't reject this. We had to approve it, which was another issue around that agricultural land. And the same thing, crofting is a different area of farming, but a lot of the crofters around the Highlands, they themselves are struggling. My friend that owns that's out in Fyvie, he is having to work 2 jobs offshore and work on the farm just so that he can make ends meet, and that's the reason why I'm supporting this motion.
Ian.
Hi. Good afternoon, Conference. Some of you may remember my first ever transport speech to Alba. In fact, it may have been in the National Council, but anyway, I started off by holding up a picture of a bag of tatties and asking the rhetorical question, well, what's a bag of tatties got to do with transport? And then I proceeded to answer that basically there are far too many lorries on our roads, and that what we were responding to was a policy operated by most of the large supermarkets of centralised distribution. And so what in effect was happening were lorries going right down to the distribution warehouses in the south of England, taking tatties from Angus, from Aberdeenshire, down to, as I say, to these distribution warehouses where they were packed in Union Jack bags and brought all the way back up again to our supermarkets.
Now, in the interest of quality of food, food has got to go from the producer to the consumer in as short a distance as possible and in as short a time as possible. Now, the funny thing is too that the amount of lorries going up and down the roads was never challenged by the Greens as being anything out of order. So what we're really saying here is that we really need to be helping to establish local markets to help farmers get their produce to consumers in local areas as quickly as possible and over as short a distance as possible. So to that end, I really would ask you to support this motion, but we need to take this further. And just as a matter of interest, I would also add that it shows how transport links in everything we do. So please support this motion and let us try and work with the farmers, help to get them to get their produce to local markets and help to keep the farming industry alive. Thank you.
Back again. Okay. I'm going to use this opportunity to call back to the previous motion while speaking on this one. Let's make it clear that the main driving factor in the decline of Scotland's agriculture and fishing is this unmitigated, disastrous Brexit project, propelled by men and women in suits in Westminster and fueled on lies, half-truths and total exaggerations and empty promises. And because of Brexit, farmers and fishermen deal with greater bureaucracy as they go through the custom checks and red tape of the EU. And now we depend a lot on livestock trading, especially with Europe, an economic bloc worth up to nearly 500 million people. And the same goes for shellfish and other fishing products. Now that they have to go through the customs barriers with the EU, they lose their freshness, they lose their market value, and, well, frankly, the farmers and fishermen get shafted. So, despite the hopes of the Brexiteers of being without regulation in farming and agriculture, we're still dealing with it, and more of it now, regardless of EU membership or not. And the only way to reverse this disaster is to join EFTA, to join the single market, and to create policies that allow our fishing and agricultural policies to thrive and flourish for the next generations of Scotland. And I ask you to support this motion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Chris. So that's the last speaker's card in for motion number 6, standing up for Scotland's farming and food producers. No cards in against. Can I ask that the motion be passed by acclaim? Next motion on the agenda is number 7, Clyde and Hebridean Ferry Service. And Angus Brendan is on his way here, not here yet. So with your agreement, those who are laughing at the front, just know why. Can I ask with your agreement confidence that we move that motion to the last motion of the day in the hope that he might be able to reach us in time because he's very keen to speak to that motion. And just before we hear that motion, I'm also going to ask Ian Cameron, who chairs the Transport Working Group, to give us an update on their work. Are you agreeable to that, in which case that will mean that the next motion we hear is the housing expansion one? Is everybody happy with that, to try and accommodate someone travelling a very long distance to get here? Yeah, everyone happy? Yes, thank you. To that end, and apologies Nick for calling you before you were anticipating being called, please welcome Nick Jury, the Chair of the Housing Working Group, to speak to and propose motion number 8, housing expansion via pension fund capital mobilisation. I took ages to say that on purpose so you could get up here. There you go.
Hello, Conference. So this motion really deals with two aspects of housing policy. The first on the question of finance. So as you'll see in the motion, Homes for Scotland, who are actually an industry lobby group, realise that we need 600,000 homes by 2035. Based on the current rates of construction, that's never going to happen. Now, it's clear that we do need independence to realise that aspiration, to realise the 200,000 public homes of that 600,000. But I'm a real opponent of a big boy did it and run away as a political strategy. I think if you want to convince people that you've got their back, you actually have to have their back. So we're in the midst of a housing and homelessness emergency as declared by the Scottish Government. We can't access government treasury bonds, that requires the power of independence. And councils can't access money from the Debt Management Office because of the prudential borrowing regime. At present, if you're a council and you propose to build council housing, the prudential borrowing regime will ensure that you cannot do that, because you can only borrow on assets that you currently have under the prudential borrowing regime. So Alec Neil, who was Scotland's best housing minister, I think we've had a few empty jackets since then, he has come up with a scheme whereby we can leverage up to £20 billion of pension fund capital to start that process of having a national house building company and increasing the supply of public homes, and also building private homes where we can cross-subsidise the sale of yet more public homes. To do this, we would need a national house building company, that's our policy anyway, but it would enable us to more than double the current construction of public homes. I think that's a no-brainer. Also, key to his argument, and it's a good argument, is that it would be cheaper than borrowing from the Debt Management Office. So at present, if a council goes to the Debt Management Office, it would cost more for the borrowing than a 50-year bond from pension firms. And we're only talking here about ethical pension firms, but there's more than 20 billion in capital available. So I think we should get on with it and do it. It's a no-brainer.
Thank you very much indeed, Emmett. And now I'd like to call Steve Chisholm to speak in favour of the motion, to be followed by Murdo Ritchie, to be followed by Ewan McGlynn. Steve.
Conference, this is an excellent motion from Nick and his seconder. We've got a real crisis in housing across Scotland. You know, Thatcher's buy your home policy of the 80s stripped us of housing stock, and that's just not been replaced. And across Scotland there are pockets of private properties being bought up as second homes, many lying empty for much of the year or put up as short-term lets on the likes of Airbnb, putting profits into other people's pockets. We've got no homes to address the homelessness crisis. People living in the streets because there's a shortage of homes. They've either been allocated elsewhere or they just don't have enough of them. We've got incoming workers, nurses, teachers, care workers, and many more. Certainly we see that in the Highlands and other parts of Scotland too, where people want to take needy jobs but they can't take them because they can't find an affordable place to live. We just need more social housing, and Nick's point about affordable housing is so true. So many people just can't afford affordable housing because it isn't affordable enough. So basically, if we're going to grow our economy, if we're going to fill these jobs, we're going to create the infrastructure we want, the economy we want. People need places to live. Of course, they need the doctors, the surgeries, the schools. But of course, no matter what that social need is, whether it's the industrial jobs or those services that support our societies, we just need more houses. And what's being done at the moment, the level of funding put into it, is just totally inadequate. And here we've got an opportunity to seize on sources of funding that could allow us to accelerate building. If you build at scale, the prices come down. Council in Inverness tells us that an average sort of 2-3 bedroom house now to build is about £270,000. If we can really massively increase that build level, we can bring that price down, build even more quickly. So please support this essential motion. Thank you.
Thanks. And now call Murdo Ritchie to speak in favour of the motion.
Thank you, Chair and delegates. I do speak in favour of this motion. As Nick pointed out, independence would bring about a whole change in the structures of funding for housing and its importance. But we must more importantly, recognise that what we do now matters. We can't just let the phrase housing emergency become an offhand phrase that we just throw about and then forget all about it. I have become sick and tired of watching homelessness rising. I have become disgusted watching the police putting up barriers to take away the remains of those who have perished in shop doorways. And as a security officer, I grew sick and tired of having to move on homeless people who tried to sleep within recesses in shops. It's a dangerous thing to sleep in recesses in shops, especially if it's a fire exit, because you're endangering the people in those shops. So homelessness doesn't just affect the people who are without homes, it affects everyone. I had the pleasure of listening to Alex Neil this year at the annual John Wheatley lecture, and he outlined the plans for building these new homes through using pension funds. I believe it's an excellent proposal, and it surprises me that others are not taking this approach. But the important thing is that there is an awful lot of mealy-mouthed rhetoric when it comes to housing. And it causes the problem. We have to show real determination, real initiative, and and recognise the importance of this issue and not just use it as a talking point. This is why I believe we need to support this motion, and we need to also talk more about the homelessness, because homelessness is an abomination that in one of the richest countries, whether you call it Scotland or the United Kingdom, should not exist. And for that reason, I hope that when we've built into our independent Scotland a written constitution, one of those rights will be for a right to a home for everyone. So I urge you to support this motion.
Thank you, Roger. I now call Ewan McGlynn to be followed by Alan Duffy, both will speak in favour of the motion, to be followed by Gavin Bain, also speak in favour of the motion.
Afternoon, conference. I think we have a serious problem in Scotland, and most of that is caused by our councils. We need to take housing in national government. Our councils are totally failing us because they are passing the buck on to housing associations to deal with this problem that basically they've created themselves. An example in Edinburgh at the moment, we had an empty army base, became vacant in 2022. Not only did it have barrack-style housing, it had 3, 4 and 2-bedroom houses, it had its own catering facilities. What have we let happen to that? We've let it be burnt down by vandals because our council failed to act. They could have quite easily brought that into the council fold and used it as temporary accommodation. We now have people living in tents on Princes Street, Edinburgh's major street. What's our council doing about it? Absolutely nothing. Now, a wee bit of this, what I'm going to say, knocks on to our last motion, and that's to do with farming and farmland. At the moment, our big cities are eating up farmland for private developers. Those aren't homes that we can rent. Those are homes that are built by private individuals to make money and profit for them, not for us. What we need to do is take profit out of housing. As long as that profit exists, people are failed to be housed. Our housing associations are the same. A lot of these are private companies making a lot of money. Throughout Edinburgh, the developments recently have all been done by private housing associations. The whole of Pilton has been redeveloped on what was council land. That land has been given away to these companies for basically nothing. Our policies need to be a central policy run by central government and not run by councils anymore, and I fully support the motion.
Thank you, Alan Duffy, to be followed by Gavin Bain, please.
Thanks, Tasmina. A lot of what I was going to say has already been said, but the one thing I will say is the last time we had any reasonable amount of housing built in Scotland was when our party leader was an MSP and Alex Neil was in charge of housing as well. We get told by the likes of Westminster saying, yeah, well, we could build these things, you know, it has to be done over a 20-year period. And that's based off the fact that housing properties will drop in price because of that. Personally, we've got that much homelessness in Scotland. We don't need affordable homes, and it's one thing that really is one of my bugbears is when I hear politicians talk about affordable homes. We need more affordable homes. It's not more affordable homes we need, it's socially rented housing. People need homes out there. Yes, there's people sleeping in doorways and everything else, but there's people that aren't even getting that. There are people that have had homes and then they're being kicked out of those homes because those private landlords are not wanting to keep them in there because they can get more money from somewhere else. And if we are looking at this, and I mentioned this on the Housing Committee as well because I was on the meeting with that, we need to build these en masse, not over a 20-year period. We need a mass building programme, just like it was after the war. We need a mass building programme so that everyone can get a roof over their heads.
Gavin James, you can favour the motion to be a final speaker on this motion. Thank you, Gavin.
So, I'd like to support the motion. I think on behalf of my colleagues on the Population Strategy Working Group, housing was one of the key topics that kept coming back time and time again. It impacts the ability of young families to be able to sort of establish themselves. It even impacts whether a family can stay in the area or be forced to move away. Housing is so central to the health and survivability of communities and a massive part of the country we're trying to build. So please support the motion.
There are no cards in against. Can I therefore ask if motion number 8 on housing expansion via pension fund capital mobilisation is passed by acclaim? Thank you very much. Instead of going to move to motion number 9 before going back to motion number 7. Motion number 9 on safeguarding to be proposed by Christine Watson, no less, and seconded by Suzanne Blackley. Christine.
Thank you, Chair and Conference. I rise to move this motion because we have a duty to safeguard every vulnerable person in Scotland, no matter who they come to for help. In 2007, the Protecting Vulnerable Groups, the PVG Act, established a scheme to vet individuals working with children and protected adults. Since April this year, membership of that PVG scheme is legally required for anyone in a regulated role, and from April 2026 it must be renewed every 5 years. Disclosure Scotland manages this system by carrying out criminal record checks and continuous monitoring to ensure suitability. But astonishingly, MPs, MSPs and councillors and their staff are not automatically required to be PVG members unless they carry out regulated work. So the problem, let's be clear, politicians and their staff routinely meet with vulnerable people, women escaping domestic violence, young people in crisis, elderly constituents and children in care. So here there is already a power imbalance. Often these individuals are at their most distressed, disclosing sensitive information, traumatic personal experiences, and yet the people they've gone to for help have had no mandatory safeguarding check carried out. We have seen, and very recently, public figures abusing their office, grooming young people, indecent images, violent offences, all carried out while in a position of trust. These aren't just isolated incidents. They are failures of the current system. What we believe, conference, is it's unacceptable that someone who is barred from working with children can still serve in a public office and influence the life of these same children. Safeguarding should not be optional for those in power. Public trust is earned, and it must be by consistent standards. If teachers, carers, social workers must have PVG checks, why not the very people who make these decisions about their lives? Alba stands for protecting women, children and vulnerable adults, demanding the highest ethical standards in public office, restoring trust through transparency and accountability. So today, we're calling on the Scottish Government to require PVG membership for all MSPs, councillors and their staff as a condition of public office. Enforce renewal and monitoring in line with other safeguarding professions, and introduce mandatory annual training which will help elected representatives recognise and respond appropriately when vulnerable people disclose abuse and distress. Conference, if you support this motion, you are saying one simple, powerful truth. Every person serving the people of Scotland must also be safe for the people of Scotland. I please urge you to back this motion for the sake of public trust, public safety, and a Scotland that protects its most vulnerable. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Christine. I now call our apologies, convener Suzanne Blackley, to speak in favour of the motion, which is actually seconding the motion. We'll then hear from Murdo Ritchie, who's speaking against the motion, and then we'll hear from Alan Ross, who's speaking for the motion. Suzanne.
Thank you, Conference. I am honoured to second this motion because safeguarding is not optional. It's protection, it's trust and it's responsibility. You cannot read to a class of children or volunteer to hand out tea or coffee in a care home without a PVG check. But elected representatives meeting survivors of abuse, judging children at poetry competitions or meeting people in crisis can do so with no PVG check at all, and that is shameful. It's a loophole that puts vulnerable people at risk. We've all seen the stories: councillors, MSPs, MPs convicted of domestic abuse, sexual offences, grooming, people who abuse the trust that came with office. Enough with the excuses and enough of the exemptions. Conference, it's not about politics, it's about decency and it's about trust. When a woman escaping abuse walks into her local elected official's office, she deserves to know that the person sitting across from her is safe and vetted. When a young person shares something deeply painful, they deserve care, not risk. Public office should never mean privilege without scrutiny. It should mean accountability and integrity. And this motion asks that every MSP, councillor and staff member hold a PVG membership. It says renew it, enforce it and train every year, so they all know how to recognise abuse, how to listen and how to protect. Safeguarding is not a one-off, it's a commitment to people, safety and trust. It says we stand for women, children and the vulnerable. That's what Alba says. Well, let's prove it. Let's close this loophole and make Alba the party that demands and delivers the highest standards in public life, because safeguarding isn't just red tape. It's humanity, it's decency and it's who we are. Conference, please support this motion.
We must oppose this motion very strenuously.
what may seem as a safeguard, and it uses the phrase safeguard, is a dangerous attack on political liberties. We cannot have the police deciding who should be a member of Parliament, a member of the Scottish Parliament, or for that matter, a councillor. That would be a disaster. I speak as someone who has held a Disclosure Scotland certificate for many, many years now, and I've worked in many jobs that have required serious police checking. So I'm not speaking because I'm a hidden criminal or abuser. I want to point out there are very, very grave dangers. What is described here as preventing vulnerable groups is simply a disclosure check. It comes out and just gives a statement of what may or may not have happened. And remember, an awful lot of this can also be severely contested by the individuals involved. It creates a very large number of problems, because one of the problems of much political life is malicious gossip and malicious attacks. And quite often, it's hardly a politician around who doesn't suffer from those kinds of things. Sometimes they're true, many times they are false, and most of the people involved most of the people accused are usually not guilty of very, very much. If we allow this to go through, we have to remember that up to 1,000 people have already been charged with acts under the crimes under the Treason Act. That differentiation will not appear in Disclosure Scotland. You can also think of those people who've been arrested on picket lines. They would not pass that sort of act. It's a very, very dangerous act, because many political acts also put you up against the law. And that can be could have very serious consequences for shutting down much of the political debate and discussion that is necessary in this country. So what sounds like something that is preventative and looking after people can actually be very, very damaging. And I think there is a wider case here to point out that what passes as safeguarding and what passes as privacy legislation is also creating major problems for active participation in political life. I think this kind of motion has got to be opposed very vigorously because of the damage it can do. I can't avoid one other last thing. Those issues of vulnerable groups, children, women and others, the only way we can really deal with that is by changing the culture overall of society. These are important things to be done, and that means better political practices, personal practices and much else. But as I say, I don't think there is a regulatory mechanism. As a regulatory mechanism, this is desirable for our political life.
Thank you, Marjorie. And now I'd like to call Alan Ross to speak in favour of the motion, to be followed by Nick Jury, who will speak against the motion, to be followed by Jim Galt, who will speak in favour of the motion, and then there's no speakers. Alan.
Thank you, Tasmina. Well, as Murdo just spoke vigorously against the motion, I would like to talk vigorously in favour of the motion, not to have any argument with anyone here. But my first awareness of this came through being a member of the Equalities Group and being asked if councillors in Scotland were all routinely part of the PVG scheme. Now, as a former councillor, over the 15 years I was on Dundee City Council, each and every time I was elected, I was required to be disclosure checked and was a member of the PVG scheme, as was every single councillor in Dundee. Now, I just took it that because every councillor in Dundee was a member of the PVG scheme, that every councillor had to be, across Scotland, a member of the PVG scheme. The reality is, and I was absolutely astonished to find out that that's not the case, the reason that every councillor in Dundee is a member of the PVG scheme is because of an anomaly, if you like, with Dundee City Council,
whereby all councillors sit on all service committees, and that was why every councillor in Dundee had to be in the PVG scheme. What is being said here is that it depends which committees you sit on, or whether you need to be a member of the PVG scheme, and whether you come into contact with vulnerable people in our society. I can't think of a single committee that I ever sat on that did not cross the lives of vulnerable people. It's ludicrous to think that there's any committee in any council whereby you wouldn't have to deal with something to do with the lives of vulnerable people. But let's forget about all the committees, and let's forget about your role as a councillor. My first role that I always had as a councillor, that I always thought was my first role as a councillor, wasn't to my committee or wasn't to my convenership, it was to my constituents, and it was to my local community. And part of that role was to hold a regular weekly surgery, which was required by law. You had to do it. Now, these surgeries, there's all sorts of safeguarding issues with surgeries, not just for your constituents, but for the elected member as well. Let me tell you, I had some hairy moments during those times, but this isn't about the councillor, this is about the constituents. I can't tell you the number of vulnerable people I came across in that role. People would come to you absolutely desperate and give you any piece of information that they thought they had to give to you, volunteer it to you. If that information falls into the wrong hands, that could be abused so easily. And I couldn't believe it when I found out that not every councillor or MSP or MP had to be part of the PVG scheme. Murdo spoke about, if we adopt this, it would be a tragedy. The tragedy has already happened. Christine is a fantastic candidate, but we shouldn't be having that by-election in Fife. Because the reason we're having that by-election in Fife is because that councillor, who not only was he not PVG checked, but apparently his group leader had concerns or knew things, and his party still allowed him to stand for election. Now, so the tragedy has already happened. The tragedy happened when a hidden camera was put hidden in the toilets of our parliament by an MSP. The tragedy is already happening. These people should not be in public life. Gossip doesn't show up on a PVG scheme. Convictions show up on a PVG scheme. Arrests show up on a PVG scheme. It's ludicrous that people in public life are not held to the same standards that that Suzanne spoke of. I was laughing the other night that I was remembering my dear auntie, who's sadly no longer with us anymore. She was a member of our local church's Women's Guild, and I remember her finding it absolutely hilarious that she had to be PVG checked in order to serve soup at the weekly soup and roll club for pensioners. A salt of the earth woman. The reason we found it so funny is because Auntie Frances would have never done anything to warrant that, but she knew that, absolutely she should have been checked, because if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to hide. If you should be helping people and you should be in public life, then you should be held to the same account. Absolutely. Because I was saying that no politician has ever done anything wrong. I don't think so. So I vigorously back this motion, and I hope conference backs it too. Thank you.
Yeah. Against the motion, to be followed by Jim Galt, who will speak in favour of the motion, to be followed by Neil Handy, who will speak in favour of the motion, to be followed by Marjorie Thompson, and Doreen Milne, who will speak in favour of the motion. Nick.
Comrades, I wish to clarify here, I'm not speaking against the motion. It's just a comment, and it's a thing that we need to consider as a party. The points that Murdo made are well made, in my view. There are times when it's appropriate to break the law. There are times when the right thing to do is to be arrested. There are times when you might get convicted of a criminal offence. And this is a state that is very much engaged in lawfare on behalf of another state, I'm sure we all know. And there have been thousands of people arrested under the Terrorism Act. This has been used to silence dissent against the genocide. So I think as a party we need to think very seriously what happens when you get the red dot come back, somebody's been convicted of something. We need to have in place an understanding that there are some things that we think are fine. I would not have any problem with someone who has a conviction under a terrorism act for saying that they support Palestine Action, for example. I would have no problem with that person standing for our party. Now, that's the kind of discourse I think we need to put in place. Because, yes, absolutely, we do not want paedophiles, rapists, people who are a danger to vulnerable groups. We don't want those people standing for election for us. We don't want them working for us. But I think we do need to have the nuanced discussion about which laws we consider important. And obviously protecting vulnerable groups is one of those laws.
Thank you. Jim Dalton, followed by Neil Handy. Jim.
Hi, Conference. I'm for the motion, basically because I am a vulnerable person. I come under this category. I myself have 2 PVGs. One for helping veterans, because I'm a veteran myself, and the other one for helping autistic people, because I myself am autistic. I support the motion basically because it needs to be there. There needs to be some support. However, I take on view Murdo's views that he has. What I see is an opportunity here for Alba to actually move this motion further, take into consideration Murdo's, those that are against it, and actually it gives Alba a very good chance to become a Scottish leader in helping vulnerable people. I myself have spent the last 3 years working with vulnerable people because I'm the chair of a committee that is advising the government for bringing in the new Eldon Bill. I won't go into views of what the Eldon Bill is, but it's been an eye-opener for me. I didn't realise that I'd come under the vulnerable category, and it's something which, when I heard that Suzanne and Christine were doing it, I was in wholehearted favour of. These people need support. A lot of them are a lot less, no, they're a lot more vulnerable than what I am. And they need the help. But there are many, many people out there that are, they've got devious minds. And I see Alba, a good opportunity for Alba to take this motion and hopefully, because it's not too late, get it through in the Eldon Bill. Because it needs to go through. I'm not going to waffle on anymore now. All I will say is support the bill, please.
Thank you, Jim. And I call Neil Handy to be followed by Marjorie Thompson, both will speak in favour of the motion.
Thank you very much, Chair. I won't speak too long on this, but just to say I have been subject to this kind of legislation since I entered the NHS at the age of 19. Back then it was called exemption from the Rehabilitation of Offenders Act, and so you had to make a declaration of anything that you had been convicted of, regardless of whether that conviction was considered spent or not. So that's been a normal part of my working life, and indeed beyond that I continue to have a PVG check because of work I do with Bernardo's. And I do find it absolutely extraordinary, that this is something that has not been required for those in elected office, because I can make very similar comparisons to the level of detail and intimacy of information that I received when I was working in the NHS to the surgeries that I conducted both as a councillor and as an MP. And I can understand fully the need for disclosure checks for members of Parliament, councillors and MSPs, because you do see people at their most vulnerable. And the obvious example for me was Sandy Peggy, when she came to me and she had to recount all of the stuff that she's now had to recount to the world because of a tribunal.
And you have to have a certain level of compassion and understanding there, and it's very easy to see how someone with an ulterior motive could exploit a vulnerable person in that situation. Now, going on to the specifics about the candidate, or the reason why we have a candidate in the Buckhaven, Methil and Weems Village's by-election, Christine, she is contesting that election because David Graham, who was the councillor there before, was sent to prison for having sex with a 15-year-old child. So that is a very real and very extreme version, but it's not unique. We have seen that kind of behaviour from other members of Parliament, maybe sometimes less extreme and sometimes even more extreme. So the notion that elected officials should somehow circumvent these types of checks, I think is completely wrong. It's also important to accept, and this is a direct comment to those who are opposing this motion, that there isn't a guillotine. You know, it's not that if you've got throw up something in your past, it doesn't, you know, rule you out of employment. It's there for discussion. And obviously, if somebody's been arrested because they've protested against something noble and valuable that chimes with a political party's cause, that's a very different thing to someone who has broken very clear laws that would impact vulnerable people. So please support this motion. It's a great opportunity for the Alba Party to lead the way on responsible people being elected into public office. Thanks.
Johnson, to be followed by Doreen Milne, who will be our last speaker, both speaking in favour of the motion. Margie.
Firstly, can I just pay tribute to Suzanne and Debbie for their work on women and equalities and disability, because I think it's something that's much needed, and it was something I enjoyed participating in once or twice last year. I just said to Ewan, was the guy that had to step down in Christine's constituency, was he Labour? And he said he thought so. I said it was Labour SNP. Because certainly when I lived in London, it didn't happen once, it didn't happen twice, it didn't happen 3 times that Labour members of Southwark Council were caught grooming policemen masquerading as 14-year-old girls online. And that brings me to something which I think hasn't really been stated in this country, which is we see all the drama about the grooming gangs in the Midlands, people that might be taxi drivers, small-time drug dealers, or corner store owners. But why isn't anybody talking about the Epstein files as a grooming gang? That's what it is. The tabloids that are so happy to stoke racial division and hostility in both America and Britain don't ever seem to really apply those same rules, because of course if you've got a grooming gang that's international, that includes Bill Clinton, Bill Gates, Alan Dershowitz, the hideous Israeli former Prime Minister, is it Ehud Barak, Ewan? Anyway, these people are exempt, it seems, from any sort of rules. And I think even Lord Yum Yum, Mandy, Peter Mandelson, God knows what he was doing there if they specially procured people for him as well. But this kind of legislation, at least in Britain, would ensure that some of the white British guys don't get away with what they've been getting away with. The final thing I wanted to say is that my convener, Ewan, just said, don't forget to mention digital ID. Well, we're all supposed to have digital ID so they can interfere with our bank accounts, benefits, whatever. But the royal family and government are exempt from these digital IDs. Those are exactly the kind of people that should also be subject to this, because look at Cyril Smith. Look at all those people that held those horrible sex parties at Dolphin Square. It's disgraceful, it's disgusting, and I think one of the reasons some weirdos are attracted to public life, because as Ronald Reagan once said, politics is show business for ugly people. It gets them the opportunity to take advantage of vulnerable people, whatever background they come from. And I'm just really sick, particularly of the racism. So, oh yes, obviously royal family, remember the royal family, Mountbatten, and the current disgraced person who still is living in rent-free accommodation should also be subject to this kind of stuff because they interact with vulnerable people. Sorry if that offends Charles, but anyway, yeah.
I'm now going to call our final speaker, but also give the opportunity to Christine Watson to sum up, which you're able to do, for a couple of minutes at the end of this excellent debate. Doreen Long, please, to speak in favour of the motion. Doreen. Listen, I have, sorry, before you speak, I need to talk about the temperature in this room.
Oh yeah.
Because you are, I was worried about Murder rocked up with the blood and thought this is really bad. And now you're with the rolling hat and scarf. I should have said it much earlier, but like you, I live in Hope. We're in independent Scotland and heating in this room. And we were advised that there were a number of engineers on the job. The heating is broken. They didn't know it, obviously. That was going to be the case. The heating is broken. There isn't any air conditioning on, although it feels that way, cold air conditioning. It's just the air that's circulating, and they're trying to fix it. Corey went out and asked the inevitable question, will it be fixed by tomorrow? There is no answer to that question, so I promote the attire currently adorned by Doreen Milne for tomorrow's attendance at the conference. With that, Doreen.
Thank you. Thank you. I speak in favour of the motion, and some of the remarks that have been made against the motion have moved me sufficiently to come up here and speak, which is very anxiety-provoking, to be honest. However, I've only got one question to anyone who's spoken against this, is why is it okay for me, a worker, now I'm retired, but all my life, to have been checked, to have to have been checked every 2 years for an advanced PVG, to work with people, to take them into a council office or to take them into another office to meet with an MP, MSP, whatever, to get help and support. Why is it okay that I have to go through that, but they do not? I'm sorry for pointing at you guys. But there's no difference. We are supposed to live or be promoting Scotland as an equal place for people to live. Then why would I be checked and these guys not? There are many people who slip through the net. Many people who slip through the net. There's many, many convictions that are not going to censor you from working with vulnerable people. Not every criminal conviction is going to see you held to account, held to ransom, blah, blah, blah. It's never been a thing where I could be blackmailed about anything that's on my record. So why should I have to undergo that and other people in Scotland not have to do that, particularly people who hold supposedly higher positions than I do in my working life? I find it egregious, and I'm really, really upset that anyone would suggest that someone with power, someone that's going to be in a situation with anyone who's vulnerable, they don't have the same respect for folk, that they would undergo this willingly. And as one speaker said, that anyone who says that this is not a good thing, then we need to look at why they think that. It's a good thing for anybody who works with anyone who is vulnerable to be undergoing a PVG or an advanced PVG in order to clarify that if you have anything in your past, it's not going to catch an awful lot of people. The crime has to be committed in the first place to show up. So criminals or people who commit crimes while they're in office, they're eventually going to appear if these people ever try to work again. So we're not going to catch everybody with it. But the point being, it will stop some people working with vulnerable children and adults. So I ask you to support this motion wholeheartedly, please. Thank you.
I had said that Doreen was going to be the last speaker, but I've just had a card in for a remit back. I don't like to stifle debates. I will allow it for fear of being suggested I'm not allowing it. So I have a remit back from William Easton. William, do you have a seconder for your remit back? Somebody to raise their hand to enable the debate? Can't see. Anybody? Somebody in the front. Okay, thanks Morgan. William?
Hello again, conference, fellow compatriots. I'd like to remit this motion back, not because I think this motion is not valid and that it doesn't have a lot of meat to it that I agree with. However, I feel like the concerns raised by certain members of the audience who have very valid concerns I think the threshold for what would be a crime that would cause someone to lose their ability to run for office, the threshold would need to be looked at. What would be a crime that would get someone knocked back from it because there would be a danger to somebody who's in need of safeguarding versus someone who they've committed what would be considered a crime but not enough to be knocked back from public office. I myself have had a PVG check in the back because I've worked in the education sector in schools, so I have had to make sure that I'm safe to work with vulnerable people, and I so absolutely agree that some form of background check is absolutely essential. But then I think of, I'm an avid reader of history. The very first Irish Parliament, the first Dáil, were seen as a gang of hoodlums, criminals and terrorists, undermining the integrity of the so-called the empire, the family of nations, or whatever you want to call it. They did not become the government until they sat down and signed a treaty. Up until that point, they were seen as criminals. And their biggest crime was the crime of saying no to an oppressive system. Now, so I do not speak against this motion because I do believe, obviously, it's important that members of public office, considering the access they have to different groups, should have some kind of check to make sure that they are safe to do so. However, I asked that the threshold of what would be considered, what would cause someone to fall so that they're not considered safe to pass a PVG check, etc., and therefore run for public office. Do we have more solidly defined threshold on such a thing? That's what I would simply like to put to you all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, William. I'm just going to close the debate now. I know you haven't had a chance, anyone, to speak against the remit back because I've only just taken the remit back. If anybody wishes to do so, please raise their hand now. Otherwise, I'll just move to summing up. I can't see a hand, I just want to give you the opportunity. Thank you very much indeed, conference. Christine, you have 2 minutes to sum up. And I should add that William has remit back when you would ordinarily have it, but there was no one else who has spoken against your remit back to enable you to then counter that argument. Okay, just for the sake of being constitutionally correct. Christine.
Thank you, Chair and Conference. I just to say, I mean, it is quite, I mean, I do feel it is really quite astounding that this safeguarding is not in place already, and it is not something that has been looked at before now. When I started, commenced my nurses training in 1979, and as Neil said, I required at that point, as an 18-year-old, to fill out a form declaring whether or not I had any convictions at all, and that were not spent under the Rehabilitation of Offenders Act. So this is not something new at all for anybody who's working in public office, in the healthcare, in social work, in teaching, in the police. All these posts require safeguarding, and it is not. It's not going to. And previous convictions are not necessarily going to bar you from serving or getting a job in the NHS or anywhere. They are looked at in the context of the role that you are going to be carrying out. So it's not something that is automatically going to bar you, but it is necessary, and we are looking at protecting the most vulnerable people in our society, and they have a right to know that, to the best of our knowledge, the people they are going to for help are not presenting a risk to them. And I please urge you to support this motion.
Aren't we lucky to have Christine as a candidate? Yes. now move to the vote, and first of all we're going to vote on the remit back. All those in favour of the remit back, please raise your cards. All those against? The remit back falls. All those in favour of the motion, please raise your cards. All those against? Overwhelmingly, bar one. Well done. Motion to pass. Thank you very much indeed for that debate. We now move to the motion that was earlier on the agenda. I've been told that Angus Brendan McNeill is in the house. He has much to be grateful. I'll choose what I'm going to call in the favour that I've managed to do for him by moving things along until he's been able to join us. But we're going to start, first of all, as I promised, with an update by the chair of the Transport Working Group to lead us into the Clyde and Hebridean Ferry Service motion. So, I invite the chair of the Transport Working Group, Ian Cameron, to come and give us an update on the Working Group. Ian, welcome.
Glasses first. Right. Good afternoon again, conference. Transport has always been more than just how we move from place to place. It's about how we connect our communities, build our economy, and shape the Scotland we want to live in. Scotland's transport system is failing its people. Unsafe roads, unreliable ferries, overpriced rail, and private dominance in air travel. That is why the Transport Working Group seeks to launch Scotland's Transport Independence Campaign to transform our infrastructure, empower local communities, and make transport central to the case for independence. From the A9 safety campaign in the Highlands to calls to reopen the Rosyth-Dunkirk ferry, our members are already leading the charge. This campaign will demand public ownership, Scottish-built infrastructure, and a unified national transport policy covering road, rail, sea and air. Campaigns thrive when they connect with communities through social media, local meetings and real conversations, not just conference speeches. We will bring together campaigners, engineers, experts and ordinary Scots in one movement to demand better. We are preparing a strategic document setting out infrastructure priorities from the A9, A96, A77 and A82 upgrades, just to name but a few, to ferry renewals, local manufacturing and modern rail systems. This document will underpin our campaign, and today I am seeking formal approval from conference to proceed and make transport a core pillar of Alba's election platform. Colleagues, this is about finishing what was started, delivering on the unfulfilled vision of Alex Hammond's government, but updating it for a new generation. The difference is that this time it will be driven from the ground up. So today I ask conference for your backing to endorse the Scotland's Transport Independence Campaign, to empower our regional groups and to show Scotland that Alba stands to build the roads, the rails, the ferries and the future of an independent Scotland. Thank you, and let's get Scotland moving.
You can take the clap seen as a rounding endorsement of all the work we continue to do. Thanks to the Transport Working Group. Thank you very much indeed. We're now going back in time to motion number 7 now, our final motion on the agenda before our highlight of today, which isn't Angus Brendan McNeill, it's actually Neil Hanvey, our deputy leader. However, yes, indeed. Motion number 7 is to be proposed by Mike Mackenzie and seconded by Angus Brendan McNeill. Mike Mackenzie, welcome back.
Thank you, Tasmina. It occurred to me that it would be a delightful irony if Angus was delayed by the ferry having broken down. And Delegates, some of you may remember that I proposed a very similar motion at our very first Alba conference back in 2021. And since then, life on those of our islands served by CalMac ferries hasn't got any easier. Imagine running a business when vital supplies can't get through. Imagine a hotel when guests repeatedly don't arrive because the ferry's cancelled. Imagine running a restaurant, a cafe, a tea room when your supplies don't arrive because there's no boat. Imagine farmers and crofters who have animals loaded on trailers for market, waiting for long hours only to find the ferry is cancelled. Imagine fishermen with catches rotting on the pier because they can't get them to market. Imagine being unable to attend weddings and funerals and all manner of social and business engagements. Imagine being unable to attend important mainland hospital appointments. Imagine all this going on year after year after year. And it's difficult to believe that when the Scottish Government finally acknowledged these difficulties, that it came up with a wholly inadequate compensation scheme. A compensation scheme that fails to recognise the full nature of the comprehensive and catastrophic ferry problems that almost all of our islands have experienced. What sensible government would rub salt on these still open wounds? Delegates, enough is enough. Action is required in order to restore faith in our island ferry services. Action is required in order to reassure and provide confidence for islanders and island businesses. And action is required in order to restore faith in the Scottish Government. There needs to be accountability. There needs to be a moral hazard so that nothing like this ever happens again. So there needs to be a reorganisation with both of the agencies responsible for running our ferry services amalgamated as one organisation, with CalMac absorbing the role of CMAL, so that we've got efficient decision making and clear lines of accountability. And this new CalMac needs to be headquartered on a Scottish island, probably in Stornoway. A majority of its directors need to live on an island so that they understand at first hand the challenges faced by islanders. It needs to be a service run by islanders for islanders. And beyond this, this new CalMac needs to be charged with looking at innovative new ways of providing ferry services. The MV Alfred, for instance, which has been on hire for CalMac routes for over 2 years now, has proved that medium-speed catamarans with a range of advantages, including lower cost and better fuel efficiency, are fully up to the requirements of serving our islands. And a survey has to be urgently commissioned to look at the feasibility of providing tunnels for as many ferry routes as possible. If the Faroese can do this, why can't Scotland do it? Conference, we're campaigning for independence so that we can govern our country in a better and a fairer way. This has to include all parts of Scotland, including our islands. Please support the resolution.
I now call Angus Bennett-Neal to speak in favour of the motion, or rather to second the motion, to be followed by Ian Cameron who will speak for the motion. Welcome, Angus.
Thank you, Tasmina. It's great to be here.
And can I just say to Mike, and his excellent motion, which he's given me the great pleasure of seconding, it wasn't Karl Mack's fault today at all. It wasn't Loganair's fault. It was mainland transport. It was the M8 making me late for the train at Queen Street, which caused the delay. However, I will go on to mention bits and pieces about Karl Mack, which I had the pleasure of travelling on last Saturday. But I'd like to say just at the outset that Karl Mack do get many things right. Their staff have a lot of stresses on days such as today and this week with some bad weather. But Karl Mack have been going in the right direction in some ways for many years, especially since Alex Salmond introduced RET, which increased the amount of traffic we got in our ferries, which in turn led, of course, to other problems. But I do remember the times of Labour being in power, and the Scottish Executive, as they called it. They didn't want to introduce RET, they didn't want to have more people travelling on ferries because they said the ferries would be too full. Now, Alex Salmond stimulated the economy of the Western Isles and many other islands in Scotland as well with RET, but unfortunately the tax return that came from this increased economic activity didn't go to the Scottish Government, it went to Westminster, which is one of the reasons we want independence, so that we have a virtuous circle and not Westminster siphoning off some of the cash. A normal country, Ireland, Norway, would have seen this economic benefit in taxation. In Scotland, we didn't see that at all. The crux of this motion is a very good motion that Karl Mack and CMAL should be amalgamated, and they were only ever separated in the beginning by the Liberals in the Scottish Executive prior to 2007, who saw CMAL as an answer to a European problem as they understood it. And they maintained at the time that Europe demanded this, but Europe didn't demand this. It was a construct of their own, and it was an inefficient and expensive construct to do that. So I think the amalgamation of those two, and it being headquartered in a Scottish island, Stornoway being a very notable point, as Mike said, or a very appropriate place, would be ideal. On other issues in ferries, as I travelled last Saturday, coming from the Karl Mack sponsored mod to Oban, the bus didn't line up with the ferry at all. And the ferry leaves early. Every ferry leaves early with Karl Mack. It was meant to be a 1:30 departure. Now, we had no idea when the ferry would leave. We knew it would leave sometime between 1 and 1:30. And the drive down from Fort William got quite nervous because I got a lift, because there was no public transport matching up with the Karl Mack ferry from the Karl Mack sponsored mod. But anyway, we got on the boat. The gangway was down at 13:13. It was up at 13:16, and the 1:30 ferry left at 21 minutes past 1. I did try to tell the chief executive of Karl Mack a number of years ago that I saw an advert for Transpennine trains. Don't rush, the train won't leave on time. Well, if you're going on a Karl Mack ferry, it's not leaving when it says it's leaving early, and we wish that would change. And it's got earlier still, thanks to Brexit. Some of the ferries have to now go earlier because fish lorries have paperwork to do. So 8 a.m. ferries are leaving at 7 a.m. and sometimes even earlier, depending on the weather. So if you're coming to the islands, please bring an alarm clock with you as well. And keep an eye on their app, which is no great joy either, because they might leave even earlier still. But the other thing that's important in this motion is the talk of tunnels. And I've seen in the Faroes, I went with my former colleague Ronnie Cowan to the Faroes a year last December, and they build 10-kilometre tunnels, no bother at all. They're about to build a 25-kilometre tunnel to Sudroy, the south end of the Faroes. The cost for this will be about 16 million per kilometre. And to give you an idea what that means, the two ferries that were built on the Clyde, or are still being built on the Clyde, about to be finished on the Clyde, the cost was 460 million. And these are two Arran ferries. Now, to build 17-kilometre tunnel to Arran would cost in Faroese prices 272 million. You would have saved 188 million plus the 3 to 7 million a year revenue costs. So this motion, which makes reference to tunnels, it's a very complete motion. I congratulate Mike for the drafting of the motion. It basically shows the direction of travel that Scotland's islands will eventually go, and I think history will record at some point that Alba were at least at the forefront of pushing this and making sure that this is the direction that the country is set on and the way minds are thinking, because the thinking in too much of Scotland and too much in Transport Scotland has been primitive as regards tunnels, and hopefully we're setting them in the right direction. So thank you very much, Mike, for doing all this work, and indeed, yeah, round of applause for Mike. And please do back this motion. It says what it should say, and it says it well. Thank you.
Thank you. call Ian Cameron to speak in favour of the motion. I have no further cards of this received. Shortly, we will be the final speaker.
Well, it'll come as no surprise is that I wholeheartedly support this motion and ask everybody to support. The only point I want to add is that I would like to amalgamate this and incorporate this into the transport campaign. I mean, obviously we want to work together, and as well as looking to get this motion through, but we will want to take it forward, take it as part of the campaign. We're looking to put campaign in place over every region, and so obviously for the Highland and Island region, this is integral to the requirements, and we will be focusing on that and working closely. But in the meantime, please support this. But I would obviously welcome further. I mean, I know that Angus and I worked on the last motion for the last conference, and I would like to carry on with this dialogue and try and put this together as part of the overall transport campaign. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you very much. There are no cards in against, so can I ask that motion number 7, Clyde and Hebridean Ferry Services, passed by Clay? Now, before we move to today's highlight for which I'll pass to Kenny McCaskill, our party leader, to make the introduction, just two notices to give you. First of all, is that the Alba Social is taking place at the Student Union. Will we get in, Corey? Looking at the age profile, but the booze is cheap apparently, from 6:30 p.m. Today. And speaking of booze, it's to remember. Oh, straight away. Oh, sorry, somebody told me 6:30. I was misinformed. Straight away, probably quite aptly so. And speaking of that, and of drink in and of itself, the Alba Youth Stall is holding a raffle for a 4.5 litre bottle of whiskey. And I know the leadership are scrambling to get at it. So, deservedly so, after all you've heard today. So, buy your tickets, proceeds go to the party. It's a 4.5 litre bottle. I couldn't believe the size of it. Christina just sent me a picture in relation to the size of her hand. It's absolutely huge. So get your tickets in, and you can have it will not be drawn till tomorrow. You'll have to go for the cheap drinks in the Student Union tonight, but tomorrow night's sorted if you win. Right, to that end now, I'd like to pass to our party leader to introduce our deputy leader, Kenny McCaskill. Thank you.
Thank you. I know we're all feeling the cold, but I think we're going to be warmed up by what we're about to hear. I didn't know and hadn't come across Neil until 2019. That's my loss, and more's the pity. I met him when we were both elected to Westminster in December of 2019. He wasn't elected as I was under the SNP ticket, but as an independent, because he had been shamefully had his nomination withdrawn by the SNP. Despite that, he proceeded to gather the support of his activists, of his community, and of his constituency. He won an overwhelming mandate, delivered on his own, and then when he did come to join Alba, any claims of jumping ship were easily rebutted. What was his sin? He had spoken out against Israel and its actions in Palestine. It appears that under Sturgeon you could consort with the Israeli ambassador. You could even have MPs going and meeting with the IDF or other visits to Israel, but don't speak out about what was happening. History sometimes proves you right, and what we have seen unfolding in the genocide in Gaza shows that Neil was right to speak out in 2019, exactly as he has have the same courage to continue to speak out on that and on other issues. He should be credited with great courage for what he went through and retained those principles. But it's not just in that, because when I met him and we were in Parliament together and I confirmed my support for him and the shameful nature of the SNP actions, not only did he continue to campaign for independence when so many others in that group, not Angus Brendan, I should say, but many others certainly of the 2019 intake who couldn't get back to the benches quick enough, who disappeared into the green benches, who took up chairmanships of that, who travelled to there or whatever. Neil never did that. He kept the cause of independence alive, he kept it as his sterling focus, and he drove on. Not simply on that, but also on the cause of women and children, because people have rightly made comment about Joanna Cherry and what she had to endure. But let's be clear that in Westminster, Neil was equally as forceful, speaking out and facing the chain challenges from a Sturgeon regime, where not only was it inappropriate to speak out about the crimes of the State of Israel, it was inappropriate to speak out about defending the rights of women and children. And despite all of that, he still has time to speak out about his own constituency, about the needs of this country, and as we see even in recent days, his ability to speak out on the cause of a ferry link from Scotland. Neil is tenacious, he's a man of utmost integrity, he's a man of great principle, and we are very honoured to have him as our Deputy Leader.
It's all true, you know. Thanks very much, Conference. So today I want to begin by citing the words of our founder and former leader and friend, Alex Salmond. And they should resonate today. In February of 2024, speaking at the Scottish Affairs Committee, Alec reflected on past betrayals. Your enemies sometimes sit alongside you as opposed to in front of you. Now, we can have disagreement, as is healthy in any party, but we are the guardians of Alec's dream of independence for Scotland, and we must protect it from all who would choose to tear it all down to salve their own embitterment. That is why we must resolve to stick together and stick to Alec's plan for 2026. As we all know, Alec was not known for doom and gloom. He was ever the optimist, especially about Scotland's potential. His weakness, if I can call it that, was he focused on the good in the people he knew and strived to nurture their potential. Many of us will have an anecdote or three to share about that. And that generosity of spirit that Alex embodied is an essential part of our party and of the movement. Whatever our disagreements, we must never lose sight of our uniting cause. Independence must transcend all personal ambition. Anyone who puts their personal wants or needs before the people of Scotland is no nationalist that I recognise. The only reason I'm involved in politics is to reinstate Scotland's right to statehood. Nothing more and nothing less will do. As you've heard this morning, since being elected as your deputy leader, I have spent a considerable amount of time working with the leadership team to defend our party, our founder, and the cause of independence. But I've also continued to build the case for the 2026 election, and most importantly, I have regularly been out on the doorstep speaking to voters about Alba's positive message on independence. And those conversations are increasingly promising. These past weeks, I've joined our outstanding Buckhaven, Methil and Weems Villages by-election candidate, Christine Watson, on the campaign trail. I've spoken to numerous SNP voters who are every bit as frustrated as I am with the SNP's position on independence. They recognise that it is no different to that of the last decade. Because of those doorstep conversations, independent supporters who were unlikely to vote at all have committed to vote Alba. And SNP voters willing to give that party one last chance have readily told me they had decided to vote Alba on the list already. The mood is changing and changing in our favour. List Vote Alba is cutting through just as Alec predicted. Now let me tell you about one such exchange The guy was a fervent Indie supporter, he had flags in the garden, but he felt he had no one to vote for. His one question to me was this: what makes you any different to the rest of them? And my response was straightforward and honest. Because when we say we want independence as an urgent priority, we mean it. Alba was founded by people who put independence before fealty to a party or to its leader. Because when Alba saw women's rights and child protection being thrown under the gender ideology bus, we spoke up and spoke out. We proudly stood in support of For Women Scotland, Sex Matters, Women Won't Waste, Scottish Lesbians and the Gay Men's Network from our inception. Alba are the only party who were responsible for ensuring Sandy Peggy got the support she needed to take on the dystopian behaviour of NHS Fife and, by extension, the Scottish Government.
Yes.
I was the first politician to engage with For Women Scotland back in 2019, and it's a badge of honour that everyone in Alba should be proud of. If we don't stand for our principles, we are nothing. Well, we can't have a policy on everything going into this election. We have much to be proud of in our policy base. We need to be mindful of the campaign we are about to enter. We are working to get a foothold in the Scottish Parliament by securing the breakthrough that Alec was confident we could achieve. The voters are seeking the support and confidence. The voters we're seeking the support and confidence of are the independent supporters, many of them from the SNP or SNP voters. Our pitch must appeal to them. Our strategy for independence resonates with them. Our position on energy-rich Scotland and fuel-poor Scots appeals to them. Our position on women's rights chimes with the public mood, especially after For Women Scotland's historic win in the UK Supreme Court, coupled with the extraordinary interest in Sandy Peggy's tribunal case. Our position on EFTA membership increasingly appeals to voters as the EU becomes ever more fragile. Indeed, 3 resolutions to this conference today on farming, fishing and energy speak to those 3 vital economic drivers Scotland will retain national sovereignty over in EFTA. All of those would be at risk as a new member of the EU. Securing independence and then ceding sovereignty over these fundamental Scottish industries is lunacy now that the world has changed and changed utterly post-Brexit. But our links with Europe remain vital. EFTA membership would pave the way for access to the European Economic Area and the remainder of the UK, as trade deals are already in place. However, trade deals are but one part of the equation. What use is a deal if you've no route to market? As with post-Brexit Ireland, Scotland needs direct sea links into Europe. In August this year, Douglas Chapman and I authored a discussion paper on the importance of reinstating direct ferry services to Europe. It is frustrating beyond words that it is a nationalist government in Scotland who have consistently prevented progress on this no-brainer initiative. What's even more frustrating is that Labour MPs have now joined our calls for progress. The arguments are clear. Post-Brexit, everything has changed. The UK needs to strengthen its port resilience. There is an environmental need to reduce road haulage and carbon emissions. And there is the pressing case for Scotland to develop direct routes to market. We must use all of those to our advantage and build the infrastructure now. As a matter of urgency, the Scottish Government must deliver. Scottish and UK governments must commit at least £5 million in start-up funding to share the risk burden with operators in the early years of the service. They must leverage Rosyth's free port status to attract investment and create jobs. And they must explore a tendering process for publicly supported services to ensure long-term stability. Ireland's routes to the EU and Newhaven Dieppe show what can be done. Scotland must now follow suit. It's imperative. And I can assure you that Douglas and I will continue to fight to reinstate Scotland's direct ferry service to Europe, and we will keep fighting until the job is done. Conference. Chasing the unionist vote is a fool's errand. We can't dance to reform's tune, neither should we aim to. But we can counter their rhetoric with the approach to population management that we agreed today. A policy tailored to Scotland's needs, not that of the UK. Which brings me to my next point, that of training, recruitment and retention in our education and health services. Under UK rule, we are training teachers, nurses and other professionals, but we are unable to offer them a stable employment thereafter. After qualification, many of them find there is no full-time job available, and if they're lucky, they might find a fixed-term contract, a temporary contract, but that gives them no security to build a life here at home. This is not a new phenomena. Exactly the same state of affairs existed in the 1990s. That led me to move to London, where there were jobs aplenty and funding for further education. Down south, it was a breeze to secure funding for me to study to master's level and beyond. The common denominator here is that funding for education and health was then, as it is now, wholly dependent on how much of our money Westminster chooses to give back. It's unacceptable. It's driving young skilled workers out of Scotland, reducing our economically active population, depriving our ageing population of the healthcare they deserve, and denying our youngsters the stable, well-staffed education system they desperately need. But we know that that is not the only challenge our NHS face. In the workplace, the Sandy Peggy case has lifted the lid on institutional capture by gender extremism. When I first met Sandy at the beginning of 2024, amid the details of her story was her union, the Royal College of Nursing. I was a member of the RCN for over 25 years. For a union representing a predominantly female workforce, I was appalled at their apparent laissez-faire approach to women's rights and safeguarding more generally. When Sandy Peggy and the Darlington nurses spoke up about their concerns at being forced to share the changing rooms with biological males, they were entitled to receive the full backing of their professional body and trade union in line with the workplace regulations of 1992. That the Royal College of Nursing walked away at the very point these brave women needed them is despicable and indefensible. It was an act of craven cowardice, a dereliction of duty of care of the worst kind imaginable, and a complete betrayal of these dedicated healthcare professionals. That's why today I am calling on the General Secretary of the RCN and the Director of RCN Scotland to reverse course and apologise to Sandy Peggy and each of the Darlington nurses for abandoning them. If they had a shred of decency, they would both apologise to the nurses forthwith and give them assurances that the RCN will in future observe and obey the law as it applies to their members, rather than sacrificing them on the altar of gender fanaticism. Never again should a nursing union abandon its members in their legal fight for safety, privacy and dignity. But it's not just them. My current union, Unison, remain enthralled to discredited gender extremism. The world is waking up. It's time for the unions to get a grip now that the UK Supreme Court has clarified the law, thanks to the courage of Marion, Trina and Susan of For Women Scotland. To my mind, They would be better focused on the implications of NHS reform, or indeed NHS risk from reform, the party. The scale of NHS Scotland redesign is potentially vast, and with the full details yet unknown. What we do know is that neonatal intensive care services are to be reorganised, reducing the national cover from 8 level 3 neonate intensive care units, or NICUs, to 3 regional units. This includes the downgrading of the award-winning NICU at University Hospital Wishaw. Conference, there are strong clinical arguments for consolidating services on a regional, super-regional or national basis. I have worked in each of those services for cancer care. But it needs extremely careful planning and management to ensure expertise is retained and developed. There can be no more challenging a time for new parents of a tiny, vulnerable neonate than when they require critical care in the first days of life. To add to that stress of being removed from their local support network is an enormous burden. This proposal needs to be handled with extreme care and caution, and any ongoing NHS reform will be buffeted by such practical issues. But the more significant challenges will come from an expected Farage government down south, underscoring the urgent need for independence as a means to protect the NHS from privatisation. The complexities involved mean this is not a piece of work to take lightly. Indeed, it is the kind of policy development best taken forward by Alba MSPs when we are in Parliament. But I suggest today that we make progress on this now. So I advise Conference that we will begin this process through a National Assembly on the NHS and wellbeing soon after Conference. If Scotland is to achieve its potential as an independent country, we need to act in preparation for that every day. Every decision from a national government should help pave the way to statehood, and that means protecting key economic infrastructure like Grangemouth, or key industries such as Alexander Dennis, or developing and building our links with the world by air and sea. That's why Alec's position on how we secure independence matters to this day and beyond. The SNP's position is frankly absurd. Handing Westminster a veto over our future was bad enough, but now they're saying that even if there is a pro-independence majority after next year's election, it will be a mandate, not for independence, but for a continued inaction. They are putting their own narrow interests ahead of the needs of the country. Alba is now the only party with a plan to achieve independence, and now we know that 6 out of 10 Scots agree that it would be legitimate to pursue that plan through a Holyrood election. In a spirit of generosity, perhaps we could have a whip round and buy the SNP an early present. What about a book that says Independence for Dummies? That we could share again the domestic and legal opinions, or we could share again the domestic and international legal opinions we secured that support our plan. First, you have to seek the mandate for independence. Second, you have to put that pledge in your manifesto. And third, you have to agree with the other independence parties that a majority of votes cast on the list represents the mandate for independence. The message is clear. If people want independence, they have to vote for it. And if that means, as Andy Doig spelled out earlier today, voting Alba on the list. That is the way to win independence. That is the way to face down Westminster. And while Salvo and others pursue avenues in the UN, as a party we wish them every success. I've engaged with Sarah and others regularly on the preparation for that action, not least in sharing the legal opinions we secured. But however slick the arguments, it doesn't clear the necessary hurdle of taking the people with you. A democratic mandate for independence is an unavoidable and necessary requirement. But be in no doubt, I will fight for this party, for Alex's legacy, and for Scotland's right to independence. Thank you.